So we went, this is the third parashah. Like I said, Torah is not a historical book, because if it was, there's a lot of history missing. We're jumping forward about 2,000 years, okay, in chapter 12. We started with Adam and Eve, we jumped right to Noah, and then all of a sudden it gets to this third parashah, chapter 12, it deals with Abraham. Now the Torah slows down a little bit. Okay, so it just jumped 2,000 years, and now for the rest of Genesis, it's basically going to deal with, obviously, Abraham and his children, and it slows down to the point of where it was trying to get. Again, Torah is not a historical book, it's about God's desire to have a relationship with people. That's what it's all about. And we see here, he's going to choose a man today, Abram, and he's going to work through him, and it's a fantastic deal. So, Abraham is the father of all. Later, he becomes the father of many nations. We know his name gets changed. One of the things about when we get to this Abraham that's very interesting to me, I don't think it's studied enough, but Abraham is like, if you go through the New Testament, I didn't count the times, but when you look at some of the pages, like Noah, you look at different Old Testament people, Tanakh people, Abraham is mentioned over and over. He's quite a big theme in the New Testament. Okay? Yeshua mentioned him several times. Okay? Book of Hebrews mentions him several times. Okay? It's a major theme. The covenant that God made with Abraham is big. Paul uses Abraham's arguments, Abraham's things quite a bit. So he's a very central point to it. I think even more than David. Okay? Not to count them up, but Abraham seems to be the main character, okay, when you compare with their bidding. And I think that's very interesting. So we should really look at the life of Abraham and do all of this. Now, there's also 10 generations. We talk about these generational things. It was 10 from Adam to Noah, and then Noah to Abraham also is 10. I don't have a chart up, but it's interesting. And when you look at a little chart, there's one in the Hamash. When we think of the ages, I mean, Noah was still alive when Abraham was around. It's quite amazing. It doesn't say that they met up or anything, but it talks about Shem, okay, his son, okay, his son. In fact, tradition teaches that that's where Jacob went, okay, studying the tents of Shem, and they have some things. But it's pretty amazing to think that where did they get, where did they learn about some of these things, that Noah was still alive at this time. So let's back up before we get into chapter 12, though. Let's back up real quick, 11. And Tim talked about this last week about the Babel, and it was very good. But I want to go back to a little bit here to verse 27. It says, "Now these are the chronicles of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran begot Lot. Haran died in the lifetime of Terah's father in his native land in Ur-Kasdim. And Abram and Nahor took themselves wives. The name of Abraham's wife was Sarai. The name of Nahor's wife was Lekha, the daughter of Haran, the father of Lekha and the father of Iscah. And Sarai was barren, she had no child. Terah took his son Abram and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of Abram, his son. And they departed with them from Ur-Kasdim to go to the land of Canaan. They arrived at Haran, and they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran." So this is what the Torah just gives us about Abram. It doesn't give us a whole lot of backstory. It doesn't give us that just, boom, here he is. And he went from Ur to Haran, and then we're going to get to chapter 12. So it's interesting. It says, on the way to Canaan, they arrived at Haran and settled. I want to talk about that real quickly, because in the book of Acts, let me go, I know I'm going to quote it word by word, but if you study any Jewish literature at all, they do fill in the backstory of Abram, okay? And you can take this or leave it, okay? But it's real common that there are stories about Abram, that he was born, of course, with Nimrod and all of that. He was born, and there was signs in the heavens that basically, it's sort of like the story of Yeshua. They knew there was someone important born, and he had all of the babies killed at that time. and Abram's mother hid him inside the cave. Okay? And I'm really paraphrasing this, but it's a very interesting story. And then this is how Abram came to know. His father was an idol worshiper, was full of idols, okay? With Nimrod and all of these guys. And the story goes on that Abram went out of his cave as he got older. He wanted to worship the moon, as many of people did. But then he said the moon disappeared and was replaced by the sun. So the moon's obviously not the important one. And the sun came, the sun disappeared. He went through the whole process. And then came to a point, he said, there must be a creator of all these things. And so he's the father of the one true God. Okay, I recognize this. Then there's a story that, this will come to, I think that as he went with his father would take his sons with him to sell idols and stuff, that he would start telling people that these idols are useless. You know, can't you see what they are? His father would get all upset at him, destroying the business and doing all that. But later he was thrown into a furnace. Nimrod threw him into a furnace. He survives the story. Okay, this goes into sort of filling the gap why his brother was killed. Okay, why Lot's father was killed, because he wasn't sure what to do. Basically, should I follow Nimrod? Should I follow Abraham? He was sort of indecisive. And then when he see Abraham survive, he said, "Oh, I'll jump in. I'm okay." But he wasn't spared. And so the point of that is that Abraham wasn't looking for the miracle. He just trusted God. Okay. His brother. But then there's a story that goes even further, which I really love, is that there was a certain point where Abraham was reaching out to his father, and his father was gone. He went ahead and asked his mother for a meal to feed the idols, because they were idol makers, and he put them all in there. And then he ends up breaking them all except for one. He breaks them all up except for one. His father comes home and is upset. What happened? He says, well, that he did it, He broke all those other things, And of course his father says, how did that happen? I mean, it's just stone. And Abraham's point was exactly. That's what you're trying to do. So there's this whole story that fills it back. This was Abraham's thing. If we go to the book of Acts real quick, I think it's interesting that Acts fills in something too that the Torah doesn't have here. Or fills it sort of in Acts chapter 7, verse 1, it says, the Kohen HaGadol, the high priest, asked, are these accusations true? And Stephen said, brothers and fathers, listen to me. The God of glory appeared to Abraham Avinu in Mesopotamia before he lived in Haran. And I find this interesting. And said to him, leave your land and your family and go into the land that I will show you. So he left the land of Kasdim and lived in Haran. And after his father died, God made him move to the land where you are living now. He gave him no inheritance in it, not even space on one foot. Yet he promised to give it to him as a possession to his descendants after him, even though at the time he was childless. What God said to him, and it goes on from here. But the point is that it says that the God of glory appeared to Abraham, Avinu in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran. Okay, and then he went to Haran and stayed there. Now, why I find that very interesting is, going back to the Torah in chapter 11, it says they arrived in Haran and they settled there. There is a teaching, there is a thought that Abraham, God had already spoke to him and told him to go where he was to go, but they got to Haran and they stopped. It doesn't say why they stopped, why they did that, but they did stop. And basically, I put in my little note here, they were stuck in Haran. And how does this apply to us? I think God, this is where we get to chapter 12, because all of a sudden Hashem's going to speak to Abraham again and tell him to move on. There are times where God speaks to us, in a sense, and I'm not talking about literally, sometimes, he never speaks to me audibly, but you know what I'm saying, God moves us to do something. We don't sort of know what we're supposed to be going, where we're supposed to be going, or what to be involved with, or do that. And we start that path. But then, it's not that we're doing anything, we don't complete the path. We stop somewhere, we stop at Haran, and we settle there. And that's what it says, he settled. He didn't complete it. So we have to ask ourselves, if God has moved upon us, if God is moving us in a direction, if God is doing something in your life and doing it, He's showed you what to do or do it, complete it. A lot of times evaluate, okay, I started the move. I started to go in that direction. I checked into it. I did these things, but now you're settled somewhere. And so hopefully that makes sense. Continue on. But the great thing is God is merciful. Even when we don't complete the mission sometimes, He's merciful enough to sometimes come back around and say, hey, let's go. Let's go. And we should be the same way with people. Sometimes people, they say they're going to do something. We see them moving in the right direction. They don't completely move in it. Be patient. And sometimes remind them, hey, let's keep moving. Let's go. So we get to chapter 12 now. In the Hebrew it says, Vayomer Adonai el Avram Lekh Lekha. That's our parashat. Marezecha Umi Olatecha Umin Beit Avinecha El Haaretz Asher Arecha. So Adonai said to Abram, and then he says, Lekh Lekha. And translated in English, it says, go for yourself from your land, from your relatives, and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. And you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who curses you I will curse. And all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. I'm going to read just a little bit longer here, and we'll go back over this. So Abram went as Adonai had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. Abram took his wife Sarai and Lot, his brother's son, and all their wealth that they had amassed, and the souls that they made in Haran. And they left to go to the land of Canaan, and they came to the land of Canaan. Abram passed into the land as far as the site of Shechem, until the plain of Moreh. The Canaanite was then in the land. Hashem appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to Hashem who appeared to him. From there he relocated to the mountain east of Bethel, and he pitched his tents with Bethel on the west of Ai on the east, and he built there an altar to Adonai and invoked Adonai by name. Then Abram journeyed on, journeying steadily toward the south. There was a famine in the land, and Abraham descended to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. And it occurred as he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, see now I have known too that you are a woman of beautiful appearance, and it shall occur when the Egyptians will see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but you will let them live. They will let live. Please say that you are my sister, and if I go well with me for your sake, that I may live on account of you. But it occurred with Abram's coming to Egypt. The Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. When the officials of Pharaoh saw her, they lauded her for Pharaoh, and the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. And he treated Abram well for her sake, and he acquired sheep, cattle, donkeys, slave, and maidservants, female donkeys, and camels. But Hashem afflicted Pharaoh along with his household with severe plagues because of the matter of Sarai, the wife of Abram. Pharaoh summoned Abram and said, what is this that you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she is your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I would take her as my wife? Now, here is your wife, take her and go. So Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they escorted him and his wife and all that was his. In 13, we continue with the story of Abraham and Lot parting ways. They both got wealthy. In chapter 14, we have a war that he has to go to with the kings. His name is Lot. And also we meet Melchizedek, this figure that comes out of nowhere. And then in 15, we have the covenant promise where he goes between the animals, splits in the middle, and he ratifies the covenant with him. In chapter 16, we get into Hagar and Ishmael. He does his own thing. It causes a lot of problems. And in 17, there's a promise. We have circumcision, the promise to Sarah, and Ishmael's born, and all of these things. That's a lot to cover. So we're not going to get to most of that. So I want to go on this first part, because one of the reasons I think that Hashem has put us here is again, I've been talking about this. The Torah is about restoring relationships and God's relationship with us. That might be our theme for this year in the Torah. Every year there's something different. We glimpse new things out of it. There's a reason for it. Last year was more pointing out that Yeshua is God and seeing his divinity throughout the Torah. On that, this year, I think it's about restoration, how God's in the business of restoring people. And that's just what Torah is. So he says here, Lekha, literally it means go for yourself. That's the direct translation. Or it can mean go for your own benefit and for your own good. Okay? So this is what he's telling them. You go, it's for your benefit. It's not for God's benefit in a sense, it's for you. This is for you. And he tells him to do this. Go for yourself from your land. Now, a few things about this. Then he promises him 7 things. Let's look at those 7 things. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. The land that I will show you, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. And you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you. Number 6, and those who curse you, I will curse. And 7, all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. So he gives him quite a thing here that he's going to do. And this is so important because if God changed his back, I always talk about this. Why is it so important about Israel? Why is it so important about the things that are going on? Why is it important that God keeps his covenant with the people who are unfaithful? Physical? Because if God turned his back and didn't keep his covenant with Abraham's children through this, then how do you know he wouldn't change his mind on us as believers? See, we don't, because he's kept his promises. God is a God of promises, and he keeps it. So this is a very important covenant. When we look here, the great name, if we go back to chapter 11, verse 4, I want to touch on this real quick. One of the interesting things about 11, verse 4 in Genesis, when it says, and they said, come, let us build us a city and a tower with its tops in heaven, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed across the whole earth. So one of the goals of these guys at the Tower of Babel was to make a name for themselves. And here we see that God tells Abraham, Abraham leaves all that. Abraham leaves the city. We see that he pitches up, he goes, and in a sense he wouldn't be a name because he's going to a place where there's not going to be a lot going on. But God says, I'm going to make your name great. And there really is no name greater than Abraham's. Abraham, when you look at it, is in a sense your big face, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Islam, or whether it's Judaism, they all pronounce Abraham as their father. It's very vital to each one of those things. Abraham is known throughout the world. We call him Father Abraham. We sing a song, or the kids do, right? Father Abraham, yeah. And even though there's no physical, sometimes, relationship to him, he has become the father of those of faith. So he wasn't looking for this name. Even in verse 10, it mentions the name again. But I want to say something about Lekha real quick that I found this week. After all the years of reading and talking about these things, I was reading it in Hebrew. In chapter 22, verse 2, this really blew my mind away this way. This is the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. And in verse 2 it says, and he said, please take your son, your only one whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah. Bring him up there as an offering upon one of the mountains, which I shall tell you. When I was looking at this in Hebrew, you know what the word in Hebrew is? Lekh, Lekha. It translated it as, and go to the land of Moriah. When I was looking at that in English, I just didn't catch that. When I looked in the Hebrew, it's the same word as he used here. So in a sense, if I was to translate this, go to the land of Moriah, go to the land of Moriah for yourself. He was telling Abraham, this is for your benefit to go. It is for your benefit to go and offer up your son. And really, we'll talk about this later, but I think this is where Abraham really recognized, because Yeshua said himself, that Abraham has seen me. And this is the point that he would. We understand that the key to the binding of Isaac, to me, is a central part of it, of the resurrection, of Yeshua coming to die for our sins. All of these stories lead up to it. It's a central point. But he says, Lekha, this is for you. And what I'm saying is, it's for you. It is good for us. Leave behind your past, you could say. Move forward to a newness. Go by yourself. You know, when we do Lekha, when we pack up, when God tells us, each one of us, I remember what he told me, He didn't say Lekha, but he told me to. I was born again and had to move on. You have to pack up sometimes. You have to move on. Many of us have been through that. You lose some friendships. Sometimes you have to physically move. Sometimes you have to physically disconnect with some things. God, each one of us has a different path on that. There's a point in our lives where we have to do that for ourselves. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Is a famous saying. And we have to pick up, just as Abraham did. I believe this was his first experience in a sense of go for yourself. It is good to follow God. It is good to follow Him. It's for your benefit that we follow Him. And He's saying this in such a strong way. And it is lonely. I can imagine that someone said Abraham was lonely past him. It's a lonely path sometimes when we follow God. When you say, I'm going to follow Him, I'm going to do this, because we lose people, we lose things, we lose it. And it can be lonely. And we can see that, but we have to do it. Now in Matthew, that's why you need to come to Matthew. We just went over this. But I want to read the scripture here. And so there's two in Matthew here. Yeshua talks about the same thing here. In chapter 34, verse 39, he says, don't suppose that I have come to bring peace into the land. It is not peace I have come to bring, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against his mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, so that a man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Whoever loves his father or mother more than he loves me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves his son or daughter more than he loves me is not worthy of me. And anyone who does not take up his execution stake and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his own life will lose it, but the person who loses his life for my sake will find it. And we know he's not being disrespectful. We know we're supposed to honor our mother and father. But he said there can be nothing can stop us from following God. When God He calls into our lives and doing it, don't let anything stop you. Abraham didn't. Abraham said, you got to pack up, move on. And God calls us, Yeshua says the same thing, that we have to do it. We have to find. Also in chapter 16 of Matthew, verse 24, then Yeshua told his Talmudim, his disciples, if anyone wants to come after me, let him say no to himself. Take up his execution stake and keep following me. For whoever wants to save his own life will destroy it. But whoever destroys his life for my sake will find it. What good will it be for someone if he gains the whole world but forfeits his life? Or what can a person give in exchange for his life? For the Son of Man will come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then will repay everyone according to his conduct. So, he goes, but I want to get to this point. If anyone wants to come after me, let him say no to himself. Take up his execution, take up his cross, and keep following me. If you want to save your own life, it'll be destroyed. So he does the same thing. It's a cost. It's a big cost to become a disciple. When he calls them Lekha, go for yourself. It's your benefit. It's to our benefit that we follow the Messiah. It's our benefit that we pack up and leave our sin, leave our life, leave our things behind, and follow God. Throughout the Psalms, it always says it is good. It is good to follow God. It is a blessing to follow God. We might not see it in the physical realm at certain times. We can see that through the Psalms. Might not always seem like it, but it is to our benefit. It is to our good. And we must never forget that. All the things of God are for our benefit. They are for our good. In verse 3, it says, I think we all understand those who bless those and those who curse, and this, I think it's misused sometimes. I'm not going to go over that today, but it's not just saying you can just throw money. I'll just say it this way, okay? That's just misused, just to throw money into some fund, or someone says they're Jewish or this or that. That's not what it's talking about, okay? It's a sincere blessing, praying for Jerusalem, praying for those things, doing it, be misused. But and all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. This was the promise. God's plan was, yes, he narrowed it down to Abram. He was going to narrow it down to Israel. He was narrowing it down to a single nation, the Messiah be born. But the ultimate goal was that the whole world would be saved. I mean, it's an ultimate plan when you look at it. We're just going to look back and say, wow, God was awesome. I mean, he just narrows it down, then he explodes back out. It's always been to bless all of the families of the earth. Now, I want to read something to you from an Orthodox writing that sort of blows my mind away, okay? This is, the Jewish people love commentary, okay? This is just the first 15 chapters of Genesis, okay? But I found this one that I found very interesting. And for those in Hebrew, this might not make sense to some, but for those in Hebrew class that have gone through like chapter 12, 13, 14, this would be something down your alley. There is an opinion, and this has to do with the word blessing, okay? Shared by Rashban and quoted by Torah and this, that the verb, I can barely read this, it's so small, vaniv rachu, that's from part of Baruch, okay? The root is the Baruch. And this verse is related to the root Baruch, and in the Messianic term, it means to intermingle or to graft. I find this so interesting. As it is explained, the interpretation is inspired by the fact that nowhere else besides here, this one verse, do we find Baruch in the sense of blessing in the Nephal conjugation. Okay? If you want to understand that, see Linda, okay? No. But it has to do with the way that Hebrew has root words, and you add to them, and you do things. Some are future tense, some are this tense, and it has all that. But while in the sense of grafting, it is common in that form. What they're saying is this is unique. When he says he's going to bless all of the nations through you, it's a very unique spelling in the Torah. It's the only place for it. When it's talking about intermingling, which is close to Baruch, a word, it's very common. These rabbis or these sages, what they're saying is that, in a sense, if you want to reinterpret that verse, and all the families of the earth shall be grafted in by you. Where does Paul get these things? Where does Shul get these things from? Sometimes we look at Paul and say, oh wow, he just came up with that, he's got this new enlightenment. He understood these things, and he brought them forth. And a lot of people would have known that, but they want to hide it. Sometimes it's hidden or it's not understood. They do. Paul was blessed in the sense he made Yeshua as Mashiach, and he understood these things because he was the perfect one, trained in all of these things. He understood these languages. This is why he says we're grafted in. We can be grafted into it. We are intermingled with it. Remember, we've talked about this before. We're not going to go there. You can study on your own on this. You can go to Ephesians, okay? But there's no covenants made with the nations. They're made with Israel. But the beautiful thing is, we don't become Jews, but we were intermingled. We can be grafted in and partake of these things through the Messiah. And so the promise is these things can come alive for us. And it's right here in the writing. This is not Messianic at all. Yeah. And so it's a very, very cool. When I found that, I was like, that is awesome. That's where Paul, I don't need to just rely on Paul's writings. I can go to the Torah and say that's exactly where he got that from. And so it's a great blessing to look at that. So it is that all the people would come to. We understand it's through the Messiah. So that's the first one. Then verse 5, we'll bring out a point here too. Well, let me say, Abram was 75 years old, so when he left Haran. So don't let age limit you, right? We see some people, sometimes we think, well, I'm getting too old, or whatever. But you know what? If God wants you to do something, it doesn't matter your age. He's going to get it done. Yep. He can still use anybody at any time that he wishes, and he can still do that. So please don't put yourself in that category. Abraham took Sarah and Lot, his brother's son, and all their wealth, and they had amassed. And now, some translations, and the people, or the servants, okay? A lot of English translations, I don't have one in front of you, but will say the servants, or the people, okay? If you look at the Hebrew, though, it says nefesh, hanefesh, the souls that were made in Haran. A simple note here, the souls refer to those who they had converted in faith in Hashem, for Abraham converted the men and Sarah the women. According to the simple meaning, however, it goes on that they were servants. But it's interesting that it uses nefesh. And so the teaching from this is usually that Abraham, I was telling you about the stories. If you look at the Midrash, it talks about these stories. Like you go around telling people that stone is useless. That stone ain't going to do nothing. It's a wasteful. And he was known as the first evangelist. I mean, the big evangelist. He was reaching out to people. We talked about this Noah last week, and Noah, yes, he preached. I think it was with his life, okay? He was faithful. He's obedient to God. He did all of that. But Abraham he was righteous, and that's okay. But he went further. You see, Abraham wanted to reach out, okay? He was wanting to go out. It was affecting the world around him. And we can live either way. It has nothing to do with your salvation. Many of us, I've gone through a period of time where I was reaching everybody. If you ran into me, I'm going to tell you about the Lord. Okay, I've been through that period. I've also been through a period of like, I'm not going to say nothing unless you approach me. I've gone through years of that, just being quiet. I'm still living. Was I better than one another? No. But if you come and talk to me, I'll talk to you. But I wasn't going to approach you and do that. In my own personal life, Hashem is bringing me back to where I started from, okay? And I pray to give you more boldness and more in these end times, not to fear anybody or anything, okay? But to speak His truth. But we go through different phases, but we see this in Abraham, and I think that's why he's the father of all. But it says the soul. So the whole teaching is that he reached souls. These were people that became servants of his, in the sense, not in the sense that we understand servants, but they came with him, they wanted to be with him, they studied with him, they left idol worship, and they joined with Abraham. He was their father in that sense, and their souls were saved. Now, what's interesting about that, Nimrod, if you study some of his stuff, that's what he was known. He was one who hunted after souls. You can read some of his stuff. He was actually there to destroy souls. He was a hunter of souls. He's known as that. So Abraham comes around, and he's the opposite of that. He's to save souls. And really, it makes sense. We're either damaging people or we're helping people. You know? And this is one of the things that I have to consider too. We're up there. A lot of people, we've turned them the wrong way sometimes. We introduce things and they go the wrong way. We want to be a place where people can come and be restored. We want to restore souls and help people. This is what Abraham did. We want to follow that. Now, one other thing in Hebrew that's very interesting. In Genesis 48:16, let's see if I brought that. Let's see here. Does anybody have like a King James or NIV?
Got an NASB.
Okay, read it real loud. 48:16.
Genesis 48?
Yep.
Okay. Genesis 48:16. The angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and may my name live on in them, and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's perfect. So most of your English translations, in Jesus, they all say, may they multiply. Okay, may they multiply, may they do that. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. Except there's one Bible called the Geneva Bible, 1587, I think. I wrote it down after I put it in a piece of paper. It actually translated as, may they be like fish. Okay? Now, and then if you have a Chumash, these are really good. If you're studying Hebrew, this is an interlinear, and it really helps you with your Hebrew. And it has to, even the Chumash will change words around sometimes to fit their preference. You can't do that in interlinear because you can see exactly what the Hebrew word is, okay? So in the Hebrew, it's a very interesting here. It says, the angel who redeems me from all evil, may he bless the lads, and there shall be declared upon him my name, the names of my forefathers, Abraham and Isaac. And then it says, Vayid Gu. Well, we get the root is dog. And a dog in Hebrew is a fish. And so it's translated, and may they multiply like fish. Again, you have that vav in front of it. You have this, it's a continual thing. So it's interesting to me that when this pronunciation was given to this blessing was given, may they be abundant like fish. Because we know that fish multiply, right? By big blobs. And so it's interesting they do that because later, blows my mind away. Not just may you have a multitudes of people, but may be like fish. It makes me think. Now this is dealing with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What does Yeshua call his disciples? He tells them to go be fishers of men. Yeah. It's taking them back. That's been the goal. When you go back to the Genesis, it's go out and reach the world. Go out and do that. Now Israel shrank back. It's become actually, you don't go out now, okay? You keep it in there. We've done that sort of in our own world too, okay? But the goal was to touch lives. I'm not saying go knock on doors and do all. I'm not going there, okay, on that. I'm saying God's plan is always to be going out to reaching. He's not that willing in ancient prayers. And it's right there in the Hebrew. May you be like fish. May you multiply like fish. Yeshua says, be fishers of men. And I think they would have understood the Torah because they understood Hebrew. They would have understood it goes back to that Abrahamic covenant. It goes back to that covenant. May you bless all of the land. So it's very interesting. And so we see here that Abraham does this. Now verse 7, again, we just spend so much time on some of these things, but verse 7 is so key to our faith. It says in the Hebrew, Vayara Adonai El Avram. Hashem appeared to Abram. Now for those who study Hebrew, this is not Abraham had a vision. Abraham had a dream. Or God spoke to him. That'd be the bear. Adonai the bear. It's Re'eh. Okay? Hashem appeared. Adonai himself appeared. You can't get around it in the Hebrew. It's the word for you see. He appears. Now, how does this happen? It's funny, in the Hamash, it says, God is not physical, so the means by which he speaks and makes himself visible to people is an eternal mystery. Nevertheless, the Torah tells us that he appeared in a way that was tangible to Abraham. See, they can't dodge the question. They can't dodge it. Because one of the fundamental parts of it is that God has no body. God can't have a body. God can't do this. Yeshua couldn't be God because he can't have a body. God is spirit and this and that. Let me tell you, I say this all the time, so you know what I'm going to say. If God wanted to be a Coke can, he could be a Coke can, okay? Coca-Cola, okay? He can do whatever he wants to do. He's God. Yeah. When we say God can't do something, we just limit his ability. So God, of course, can put on flesh. It's the way that he chooses to do it. And we believe it's through Yeshua the Messiah. Because later Yeshua himself says in John chapter 8, John chapter 8, verse 56. He says, Abraham, your father, was glad that he would see my day. Then he saw it and was overjoyed. Why, you're not even 50 years old, the Judeans replied, and you have seen Abraham? Yeshua said to him, yes, indeed, before Abraham came to be, I am. At this, they picked up stones to throw at him, but Yeshua was hidden and left the temple grounds. They were going to stone him because they knew exactly what he said. He was saying, I am. He didn't leave no doubt in the minds of who he was. And we have to be very particular on this because today, even in the Messianic movement or certain groups, we're trying to downplay Yeshua's divinity. He just was a great teacher, he was a great man, he was this. No, he's God himself can put on flesh. God himself, it says right here, Adonai appeared. Not a dream, not a vision, not speaking, but he appeared. And he can't appear anywhere else, but he appears as, that's what, so it says Abraham seen. Abraham seen my day. I believe it more directly tied to the binding of Isaac, but he met Yeshua. Might not known as Yeshua at the time, but however that works out, I don't understand. I'll try to understand it. I just have to take the word. It says Hashem appeared. And the Hamash even does that. I mean, it says that they say God is not physical, so he can't, it's an eternal mystery. But nevertheless, it does say that we saw him. They can't explain it. It gets too close to the Yeshua thing. And so we see this when people say, well, God doesn't put on flesh. It can't be. No, it's just right here. Adonai appeared. And if Abraham seen him, he had to have some kind of flesh on it. Okay? It's hard to define, it's hard to talk about. The best thing I've heard from someone that I really enjoyed was in the sense that nothing is going to be perfect. How do we understand the eternal mysteries of God? How do we understand God? We just can't. Sometimes just a little bit. But I did hear this once, and I thought it was very good. If you were a fish in a fish tank, okay, and that's your world, right? It's like the fish tank. You have a relationship with an arm, basically. You know, the fish can't see far, but they have this arm that comes into the fish tank. that represents or moves their house around, cleans up stuff, and the fish recognizes the arm comes in, moves around the world and stuff. That's relationship. But that arm is just an arm of something even bigger, of you. Yeah. And that's not perfect, but that's the best thing. We see Yeshua. So I find it interesting because he's the Ra, he is the Shenkel, he is the arm. He's the right hand of the Lord, the right arm of the Lord. Okay? That's what we get to see. We don't see the whole body. We don't see all of that. We get to see a part of it. And that is Yeshua. So we see here, very important scripture though, that he appeared. So we go through this thing, that he appeared to Abraham, and he tells him that he's going to give him the land, and did all of that. And then in verse 10, it's such an interesting verse here. It says, there was a famine in the land. And Abram descended to Egypt to sojourn there, for famine was severe in the land. A couple of things we can say about this. First of all, this sort of cracks me up sometimes because God promises him all these things. Hey, pack up all your stuff. Do all of this. I'm with you. Let's go to the land. It's going to be yours. You're going to do this. And then the next verse says there was a famine. This is something that happens in our lives. God sometimes gives us direction. He sometimes gives us these things. Or sometimes someone comes to the Lord. They have a born-again experience. And we tell them, well, everything's going to be fine now. No, it's always like that. Sometimes when God moves us, when God has us to do something, when we give our lives to him, the next thing that occurs is a famine. It shouldn't shake us. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. You might get tired of it, some of you, but there's always new people. I love Christian movies, okay? I'm not going to try to say I don't like them. But sometimes we need to be honest with people. Just because you follow God, or you give your life to God, does not mean that you're automatically going to get your job back, that you're going to be promoted, that even your marriage is going to come back together, okay? Or that you're going to win the football game, okay? All of these things might not happen. It's not about that. It's about a relationship with him. And if we have to go through a famine, he will walk us through it. But we see here Abram, and I love this because Abram does things on his own now. If you read the Chumash, he didn't do nothing wrong. Okay? For those who read the Chumash and Jews, they have an excuse for everything, I'd say. Abraham's like perfect. But we do see here, he talked to the Lord already, he goes to Egypt and he says he's full of fear. Here's a guy that God spoke to, appeared to, and told these things, and we see here that he's fearful. Hey, tell me my sister. I don't want to die. Which I find amazing. So when it gives us hope, God, sometimes we are working on a path with God and we fail at times. We have we feel good, we feel energized, we feel, yes, I'm on the right path with God, and then something happens. Something happens, and we do like Abram does, we get fearful, and we make a bad choice. He didn't tell the truth. He tried to hide those things. And we do that. But the good thing is that God protected him and God restored him. And this is the kind of God that we have. Yes, in our life, walking with God, we're going to make mistakes. I'm not talking about habitual sin, we're rebellion, we're purposely doing it. But walking with God, there's going to be times where we fail him. Some of us trust him with our health 100%. But when it comes to our finances, sometimes we say, ooh, I'll take care of this myself, and then we get in trouble. Or maybe it's the vice versa. We trust him for all our jobs, we trust him for all the finances, but we don't trust him for other things. But the good thing about him is he protects, he's working behind the scenes, and he will put you back on the right path. This is what he did to Abram. It's amazing that he did this. So he does all of this stuff. And we know the story. We've already read it. Pharaoh gives him... you know what? It's sad sometimes when people of the world sometimes correct us. It's a very humbling experience. Okay? I don't know if you've ever had... I've had people correct me. I've been to a place... I won't go over the incident, but I've had someone from the world, basically, someone at the job say, they did the right thing when I didn't do it. And you feel like, oh. And so sometimes even with her, like, hey man, this is your wife. I wasn't, why didn't you tell me yet? We'll talk about Sarah when we get to her, because she was quite an incredible woman. She was being 75 at the time, is that right? Yep. Pharaoh still wanted to marry her, what I'm saying? She was an incredible woman. We'll study, we'll get to Parashat Sarah, the importance of Sarah and the patriarch's wives. They were fabulous and many things. The men get all the credit in these stories, but the women behind the scenes were what kept them going. So we'll talk about that. So chapter 13, we're going to rush through this here. So Abram went up from Egypt. He went with his wife, and that was his, and Lot with him to the south. Okay, so if you've been to Israel, you know where this is at. It's going towards the Dead Sea. Okay, these guys were going down south. You can actually go visit. Who knows if it's really there? But when you go there, there's a sign that says like Lot's. I guess it's Lot's wife or whatever. You know, there's a salt thing there. I don't know. A lot of that kind of stuff in Israel. But you can see the land down there is pretty interesting. But they go down there. And they got all the livestock, they got all of it. And let's jump down verse 5. And it says, Lot, who went with Abram, had flocks, cattle, and tents, and the land could not support them dwelling together, for their possessions were abundant, and they were unable to dwell together. And there was quarreling between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. And the Canaanite and the Perizzite were dwelling in the land. So Abram said to Lot, please let there be no strife between me and you, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not all the land before you? Please separate from me. If you go left, then I will go right, and if you go right, then I will go left. And we know the story, so Lot raises his eyes, he looks down to Sodom and Gomorrah, and basically it's like the Garden of Eden, okay? At one time, if you could imagine, that place was very fruitful. It had tons of stuff. And he chooses that, and so we know that he chose that. Now, a few things about that. Abraham was also, his first option was peace. This is something we need to learn from him. In 1 Corinthians, chapter 6, (1 through 8), it says, how dare one of you with a complaint against another go to court before pagan judges and not before God's people? Don't you know that God's people are going to judge the universe? If you're going to judge the universe and you're incompetent to judge these minor matters, don't you know that we will judge angels, not to mention affairs of everyday life? So if you require judgments about matters of everyday life, why do you put them in front of men who have no standing in the Messianic community? I say, shame on you. Can it be that there isn't one person among you wise enough to be able to settle a dispute between brothers? Instead, a brother brings a lawsuit against another brother, and that before unbelievers? Actually, if you're bringing lawsuits against each other, it is already a defeat for you. Why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be cheated? Instead, you yourselves wrong and cheat, and you do it to your own brothers. Don't you know? And it goes on from there. Sometimes we have to let matters go. This is key. I'm right, though. I'm right. I'm always right. Okay, you have to let matters go. Paul wouldn't let certain things go, though. We look at Paul's writings. He didn't let certain things like sexual immorality or fundamental doctrines. That's not what we're talking about. Okay, we're not going to compromise. We're going to fight on those things. Okay, like resurrection. Where someone's come up here and say there's no resurrection, there's that. We're going to fight over that. Okay. We're going to divide over that, okay? Or Yeshua, who he is. Those are things that we will fight over. We will that. But so many things. Couldn't we be like Abraham and Lot? Sometimes it's just better. Abraham had the right to take it. I mean, he's the guy that this is my land and that. Sometimes it's better just to let it go. And then peace. And this is something we can learn. And Paul rebukes him here. You guys are fighting over, suing each other, doing these kind of things. And it looks foolish. And this is one of the marks, I'm going to speak to us on a personal level in the Messianic world, on all that. There's a mark on us at times. That people look at it and say, y'all, there's a reason sometimes they call it Messianics, okay? Because they say, that's messy. Y'all fight over some crazy stuff. And you divide over it. And we shouldn't fight over things. I love Pastor Scott here at the church. He tells me once, he talks about, I'll never fight over the carpet. We're not going to fight over that. We're not going to fight over music. We're not going to fight over those kind of things. It's not worth it. Just let it go. If people want great carpet, they'll have great carpet. You know, I'm not going to spend my time fighting over those things. And it's the same way when we have a dispute with someone, when we have a thing, think about it. Is this fundamental or not? Sometimes just let it go. Well, I'm right. Fine. That's all right. Why not be wrong, but keep peace? Yeah. So maybe the chairs aren't the kind of chairs you want, okay? Maybe it's a song that you want playing, okay? Maybe whatever, okay? There could be so many things that we divide up on over. If we ever divide up over things and we fight over things, let them be fundamental things, not little things. Yeah. And so I think it's very clear that Abraham gives us the thing. It's peace that he strove for first. Let's see, is Greg in here? Okay, cool, okay. About 4 more minutes will be. So, we don't have time to talk about this. I got a bunch of notes you can study on your own, but we get to, after he does that, we know that he promises Abraham again, all of these things. See, sometimes when we just back down and let there be peace, God blesses us anyway. If we just say, okay, whatever, you want that, go ahead and take it. You go ahead and do it. God, that's what he does to Abraham. Verse 14, Hashem appeared to Abraham after Lot had parted from him. Raise now your eyes and look it from where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land that you see, I will give to your descendants forever. So God comes and comforts him. And this is where it's so good that God comes and does that. We see in chapter 14 that there was a little war going on with these kings. Sodom is taken, Lot gets taken captive. But one thing we don't really have a lot of time to talk to, but it says in verse 13, then there came a fugitive and told Abram, Hebrew, who dwelt in the plains of Mamre, the Amorite, the brother of Eshcol and brother of Abner, these being Abram's allies. And when Abram heard that his kinsmen were taken captive, he armed his disciples who had been born in his house. Give the word disciples there, 318, and he pursued them as far as Dan. Now, I was talking with Les, just emailed me this week. We had a discussion on this. He brought up a good point, and it's a very good point. There are some times when people make mistakes, when people say, I'm going to do it this way, and they walk away, or they go do their thing. Sometimes we have to chase. We have to go get them. A lot of times they say, well, they made their own path. Okay? They made their own path. They chose to do that, so I'm just going to let them be. They chose to go that direction. I knew they were going to get in trouble, but now I warned them. And we just let them go. There's sometimes, not every time, we have to look at the Bible as a whole. Sometimes God says, stay away from them. Don't mingle with them. But there are sometimes, as an example, we say, you know what? Yes, they chose that. Yes, now they're in a mess. But you know what? I'm going to go and I'm going to help them. I told them, be a wrong choice. But I'm going to go help them. And I'm going to bring them back. Again, not all the time. We have examples of both. This is where we need the discernment of the Ruach inside of our lives. But we do have this example sometimes. Seek God in prayer. What shall I do? And don't judge others if they're doing something maybe you wouldn't do, because we have both examples in the Bible. Sometimes the Bible tells us don't go, don't help them, leave them there. And others it says go rescue them. We look at the prodigal son, right? He was waiting for his son to come back. He was looking. He didn't say, well, he made his choice. He took my inheritance. Let him be. No, it says he was intently waiting for his son. He was engaged in prayer. He was engaged in looking out for him to come back. And this is the way we should be on that. And then he meets this Melchizedek. And I don't have time. I wish we had time to go through Melchizedek. But we see Melchizedek, which the king of the righteous king, the king of the righteous, comes out of nowhere. Judas explains him as the son of Shem. Okay, I would disagree with this. Okay. But he comes out of nowhere. You can look at these references. The only other reference of him is in the Tanakh, Psalms 110. And actually, Yeshua brings this up in the book of the book of Matthew 22, 41 through 46. He brings this up as an argument, okay? He uses that text. So come to Matthew, because you'll learn about that text later, okay? And then in Acts chapter 2, Peter also uses the same thing, showing that Yeshua is divine. That who he is. In Hebrews, you can go to Hebrews chapter 6, 19, all the way through chapter 8, and chapter 10 also deal with this Melchizedek, king of righteous. And basically, to sum it up, is there's nothing wrong with the Levitical priesthood. God has a plan, has a purpose for it. There will be a purpose for it in the future too. But also God has another order. The Levitical priesthood is just a copy of a higher priesthood. Melchizedek was the first priest that we hear about in the Torah. the higher priest, one that has no limits, the one that's not bound. We know that Yeshua comes after the king. He is the king of righteousness. And so you could look at that and come up with that. But it's just a very interesting. In Hebrew says he was no father, no mother. He just appears. And we don't have time to deal with all that today. And then the last thing, in chapter 15, verse 2, there's one interesting thing here. It says, after these events, the word of Hashem came to Abram in a vision, saying, fear not, Abram, I am a shield for you. Your reward is very great. And Abram said, my Lord, Adonai Elohim, how can you give me, seeing that I go childless, and the steward of my house is the Messianic Eliezer? This is the first time in the Hebrew, it's Adonai Kai, my Lord, Adonai Elohim. This is an unusual combination of divine names. Abraham addressed God as my Lord, indicating complete obedience and acknowledgement of his mastery. And the sages comment that he was the first person ever referred God as Adon, master. So that's a very interesting thing. People recognize it was God as creator, but they're saying here that this is the first time he's not directly, it's Adon, master. He has this relationship with him, he's my master. The sacred name in our verse, Adonai Elohim, is spelled like the four-letter name, but punctuated and pronounced Elohim. This usually combines the names that refer respectively to mercy and judgment. By this combination, now this is so interesting because he uses both combinations here. Abraham was saying that God is merciful even in judgment. We just talked about that last week. He's merciful in judgment. As Rabbi Hirsch explains, even God's imposition of harsh judgment is in his essence merciful, because in his wisdom he knows when harsh judgment is necessary to lay the foundation of a brighter future. And then we have the famous verse in verse 6, and he trusted in Hashem and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. Paul deals with that. Paul brings it up. So, I guess I'll stop there. In chapter 17, verse 1, he tells me, walk before me and be perfect. This is another subject. You can stay on your own. Abraham walked with God, but he tells Abraham, walk before me. And so we'll stop there. I'll just say this before we sing this last song. Song of Joy. Wherever we're at in life, and I speak to myself, know that God is for us. He wants to restore us. He wants us to come back to Him. He's waiting. You can see through His whole plan, even through Abraham's mistakes and all of that. God has a plan. He has a plan for each person, and He will fulfill that. We just have to be willing to turn to Him, give our lives to Him daily, and say, Lord, okay, I didn't complete my task yesterday. I didn't do this, or it wasn't on you. But let me pick up and move on today. He's a God that wants to do that. God restoration. After, we're going to do a song. It's a joyful song. We're going to do the joyful song. After that, we'll go on to Onig, and you're welcome to join on that in Matthew at 1 o'clock. If you'd like prayer, if you need prayer, or you just want to come down and pray by yourself, then do it.